Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Nzabeka for the opportunity to come and share a subject which I'm passionate about and something that I've been doing for quite a number of years now. I think risk management has even become more pronounced in this country. I think trying to follow the global trends. And not only that, what we're seeing is that because of certain events that have occurred in a few years, I think there's now an added advantage for all organizations, whether private or public, to have risk management in place. Again, I'm not able to share my presentation, so could you please allow me, Nelly, could you please just enable me so that I can share the presentation? Thanks. Okay, thank you. Okay. So our presentation today is a simple one. We're looking at how we can manage risks and performance, and that should be our guide for better decision making. Now, before I even dive into this presentation, there are a few things which I thought I should bring to the fore. So it's 2009, September the 9th. I'm in my London office as the Senior Risk Management Officer, or Senior Risk Executive, as it were. This is at Lehman Brothers. At 17 o'clock on that day, everyone is told to pack and your employment has been terminated. Everyone, whoever worked at Lehman Brothers, packed on that day and the bank closed. The rest is history. A few weeks later, I'd be invited by a commission which was set up to investigate the financial crisis, which was set up by the government of the UK, that is. The report would then conclude that Lehman Brothers did not entrench the risk culture in the organization, end quote. A few years later, BP oil would have a spillage in Mexico. A number of people would die. A few animals would also die. The environmental risk was high. To date, they're still trying to repair the damage in South Mexico because of that oil spill. The report, which was set up to investigate the cause and effect of that oil spill, would then conclude that more robust risk management practices needed to be set up. BP did not have that. Back home, a few years ago, the Integrated Financial Management System at Ministry of Finance, a system which enables government to pay the public servant or the public service workers, would crash. A few weeks later, and many months to come, some of the public servants would not get their pay. The Ministry of Finance spokesman would then issue a statement to say, as a result of that crash, government will be setting up a risk management system to ensure that such crises do not happen. A few years later, which is just, I think, 2-3 years ago, a slush fund was set up. Monies were misappropriated. A minister would be fired in the process. And one of the chief executives in one of the institutions responsible for disbursing that fund would lose his job. Conclusion, no risk management systems in place. All these events to date testify the importance of risk management. It's a tool that we need to explore and know what its benefits are. So this presentation today, even as I speak to those who are doing their studies at UNZA, and even those beyond who may be in full employment, today we want to explore the benefits, the value of how risk management can help us to make better decisions. The outline for this presentation is a simple one. Firstly, I'm going to assume that our maturity, our risk maturity, our risk capacity is not as advanced as those who've gone through the learning process. And that will be our starting point. So we want to know what risk management is. What is risk? And we want to bring this closer to home, to what we do every day, right? We also want to look at the maturity. What is the risk maturity for an organization? Not only that, you can even bring it closer to home. As individuals, what is your risk maturity? Do you practice risk management on a day-to-day basis? And then we'll look at organizational background and the context. Yes, the presentation may be focused on organizations, but what I want to encourage everyone is to bring it down. For students, very soon you'll be going into the industry. How important will risk management help you? Or what role will it play as you mature through the process of attaining or getting up the ladder, or being an executive, a manager, a supervisor, or whatever you may aspire to? Then we're going to look at the local, regional, and global context. What examples can we look to which can help us in terms of using risk management as a core to what we do? And then finally, obviously, we'll look at the risk appetite. How big is your risk appetite? All right. Just as you're able to feed on a day-to-day basis, 3 meals, I'm assuming, for the average Zambian, right? Organizations, individuals, in terms of taking their risks, they also need to have a risk appetite, because organizations cannot exist. An organization cannot grow if it does not practice risk management. You need to take risk management. You need to take risk for you to develop or grow. So what is risk, right? Risk management is governed by some standards. There's a causal framework, as well as the ISO 31000, the latest being 2018. And it defines risk as the effect, right? The effect of any uncertainty to you or to an organization meeting its objective. So today you would sit up and say, these are organization objectives, right? And then in the end, you find that you're not able to meet those objectives. Why? Because of the uncertainties which you may encounter on the way. And that's what happens in most cases. You set up today that you're going to achieve a certain objective. Like for students, for instance, you might set up today and say, by 2018, as the program shows, or 2023 rather, I will be finishing my bachelor's, or it could be a master's. But then there are risks which could prevent you. There are those uncertainties which could prevent you from achieving that objective of you completing your bachelor's or your master's or your PhD, whatever qualification you may want to achieve in 2023. That uncertainty is what is defined as risk. So there's a negative connotation to it, because risk management may be something negative. But then again, on the flip side, risk management can be positive. A picture in the presentation there, right, looks at a highway, right? That's a road. It could be any road in Lusaka or wherever you may be. And then it's developed some potholes. On those potholes, there's water, all right? Coming to the definition of risk, it would mean that the negative is that those potholes may cause road accidents, even leading to fatalities. On the flip side, on the positive, animals, birds could see it as a positive. It's a clear place where they can draw water and drink and enjoy, all right? So risk management or risk itself has a positive and negative connotation to it. There are different types which organizations face on a day-to-day basis. Failure to guard malpractices or inappropriate, poor value for money management. The example that I gave you in opening, where funds were given to an organization, but then they were misappropriated. A minister would end up losing her job, all right? Poor value for money. It's a different type. That's one of the risks. Damage to an organization's board's reputation. Stakeholders lose confidence. This is a very common example of which most organizations face. An organization is set up to meet its objectives, and it's failing to meet those objectives, and stakeholders lose confidence. It could even be government. The public, as a key stakeholder, would lose confidence in certain institutions. Why? Because they failed to deliver on the service which they're supposed to provide. Not only failing to deliver, maybe those organizations are not earning value for money in order to meet those objectives. Certain risks would be maybe failure to comply with regulations, all right? An organization is set up, but then it's not meeting government regulations. That is a huge risk because it could end up closing. The inability to respond to change, right? The belief by certain individuals and organizations that if it's ain't broke, don't fix it. Those organizations are living in the past because they're not forward-looking. They're always looking in the past because they have to adapt to changes. And they always, risk management is about scanning the environment, something that we'll be looking at this morning. Failure of the board's information and communication system. So systems by an organization have failed, right? Failing to communicate could be a risk to most of these organizations. But then those are the type of risks that organizations face. But then in terms of classifying some of these risks, I'll just look at a few examples here, all right? You can have the strategic risks. These are risks which sit at the C-suite of an organization, at the very top, board level, senior management decisions. These are strategic risks. Compliance risks, right? The failure for an organization to comply with regulations, which are statutory, for instance. You could have operational risk, right? Which is very much to do with operations. You have the common financial risks. And obviously the more important one, you could have reputational risks. So those are few. There are a number of risks which organizations may face. And the classification obviously may vary. If you look at financial risk, for instance, that can be spinned off in a number of risks. It can be trickled down in a number of risks: credit risk, liquidity risk. Those are financial risks. So that, in essence, is the definition of or the classification of risks. And the overall, I think that is what the definition of risk management is all about. The effect of uncertainty on you meeting your objectives. Having looked at the traditional risk management, most importantly is the word ERM, which stands for Enterprise Risk Management. Now, Enterprise Risk Management is basically, because if I may go back here to what traditional risk management is, it's you managing individual risks, right? So an organization could be focusing maybe on the strategic risks, the risks which affect at the strategic level, yeah, the business objective level, at the C-suite, as we may call it. So you're just focusing on one risks. You could be focusing on human resource risks. That is traditional risk management because you're only managing individual risks, right? It could be you managing the risk of failing or passing your exam. That is an individual risk. For married people, it could be you managing your husband or you managing your wife. That is traditional risk management. But then again, more importantly is enterprise risk management, because here it's an enterprise approach to risk management, which enables an organization to look at all risks in its holistic form. So instead of an organization or an individual looking at just one risk, for instance, if it's an individual, maybe looking at the risk in the kitchen, right? The risk that you could run out of food. But if you look at enterprise risk, you're looking at all the risks in your household, right? All the risks. The risk of security, you know, the risk that your child may be injured. In an organization, the holistic approach to enterprise risk management is where you're looking at all these risks in their holistic form. So you're looking at human resource risk, you're looking at financial risks all together, right? What could go wrong in all these risks grouped together? The effect in human resource risk. What effect can it have on your financial risks, for instance? I'll give you a good example. A few days ago, if not last week, in one of Zambia's TV stations, a presenter went live on TV and declared that they are not getting paid. That is a typical example of an enterprise risk management, what ensued after that. Because it started as just a reputational risk, right? Where employees may be disgruntled, for instance, maybe for not having paid. But then again, the chief executive for the same station would go on record to issue a statement, right? And claim that the presenter was drunk. And in all that statement, other things would come out. And all that would now, I think, opened up what we may call a Pandora box, because a number of risks came out and the public got to know the risks which that organization is having to go through. Because of that statement, that organization today faces huge legal risks, right? Huge reputational risk. There's even a strategic risk for that example. There's also a financial risk, obviously, because of what the presenter mentioned. So that is now you looking at enterprise. You're looking at all the risks in its holistic form, right? Now, let's have a look at risk maturity. Obviously, the word maturity comes from you growing up, right? Have you matured in what you're doing, for instance? How mature are you in what you're doing? Even organizations, in terms of risk management, they have to mature. Risk management, especially in the developing economies like our country, it's a very new practice in this country. And that in itself entails that we need to look at these organizations. Obviously, we need to measure their maturity levels in terms of how much they've matured in implementing risk management. So what is risk maturity? The maturity for an organization on how it has progressed in implementing risks. How do we measure this? There's a model which is before you. And obviously, when measuring risk management, we're looking at the 5 stages, all right? Which is the initial, managed, defined, integrated, and optimized. A number of organizations, especially on a global scale, if the average would be maybe 2.5. Most organizations, that's a score they would be in or under, which means that most organizations on average have attained the managed stage going on to the defined. And this is where you find most of our organizations. That is on a global scale. Coming home, where are Zambia's organizations in terms of risk maturity? The Institute of Risk Management Zambia did a survey, or they've been undertaking this survey. And so far, the results coming out are not impressive, because you'll find that most of the organizations, especially in the public sector, are very much in the initial stages. Very much in the initial stages. They're at 0. So most of them have not even implemented this. Thanks to the government, it's now mandatory for public institutions to have a risk management framework in place. So most of them, you will find that I think in the few years coming, they'll be attaining into the managed stage. Because if you're looking at the initial stages here, if you want to measure an organization in terms of its governance and strategy, you want to look at the culture through its people or the processes. Most public institutions, they don't have any formal governance in terms of risk. So even for you as graduates, as you go into the industry, what you'll find most is most of those organizations will just be graduating to this very important tool of risk management. Most of them will just be graduating because now they're setting up the governance structure. There's be a lot of effort in terms of reducing risk. I think a lot of effort will now have to be put in, because even from the Auditor General's office, instead of auditing an organization on whether that organization has a risk management framework or not, that won't be the essence. Yes, they'll have to have a risk management framework in place, but the Auditor General will now be auditing how you are using your risk management framework. Are you using it to the best of your ability? Is it attaining value for money, right? So that's where you'll find most of these. But then it's different when you look at the banking sector. The banking sector started implementing risk management after the financial crisis. It became mandatory that they implement these risk management frameworks and policies. And most of our institutions would be somewhere between the managed and defined. Very few, if at all. So far, I think we've not come across an organization in this country that has reached the integrated optimized stage. Yes, I may have worked for some of those organizations abroad, but again, I think it also emphasizes how further we have to go as a country in terms of using this tool or appreciating the value of risk management, right? Let's give some context and background to how risk management came into being. If you go back to the financial crisis, others may even go back as far back as the fall of Enron. But looking at the financial crisis in 2008, here again, you will recognize one fact, that most of these institutions which failed, like the institution which I used to work for, Lehman Brothers, for instance, Lehman Brothers had the most robust risk management framework. It recruited hundreds of people managing risks, me being one of them. But in the end, the organization failed. Why? Because risk management is a top-down approach. It's never a bottom-up. The tone at the top needs to be right. If the tone at the top is not right, then it's very difficult to implement risk management. Risk management needs to have the support of senior management, especially the board. The board needs to push. It should be one of the KPIs, a key performance indicator for an organization. The board, and more so through its chief executive or executive director, whoever or whatever term you may call this person, needs to run with it. Grab it by the throat and run with it. Because it's a practice that makes organizations survive. It's a practice that makes organizations grow. Without risk management, very difficult for you as an organization to grow. So the crash of 2008, most of those institutions, I would also give a good example. Lehman Brothers, yes, it failed, but there are also other examples, like Goldman Sachs, for instance. Goldman Sachs recognized way before that the prime mortgage crisis, right, or those mortgages which were not fit for purpose, were losing value on a day-to-day basis. And they went up to their chief executive and told the chief executive that we have an issue at the bottom, right? And the chief executive acted. Why? Because they hedged against those subprime mortgages. That in itself gives a difference on how the culture was in Lehman Brothers and how the culture was in Goldman Sachs. Because in Goldman Sachs, information was able to flow, right? The information was able to flow bottom up. People were able to communicate. Whereas in Lehman Brothers, it was very difficult for information to flow from the bottom up. Why? Because the executives at the top could not entertain the bad news. Today, it could even be in your campuses. It could even be in government. You'll see it, that most of the people sitting at the top do not appreciate the bad news. They are not welcoming if you have the bad news. They would rather focus on the good news. If you have the good news, they will embrace you all the time. They are forgetting that they are melting underneath there. Because if they're not getting information from the bottom where the operations are, right? I'll be giving an example shortly of where you'll see this iceberg melting while the bear is sitting on top. Because they're not paying attention to what is happening underneath. What they're paying attention to is only the good news. Most employees are hated for even giving suggestions in terms of where the organization may be going wrong. You offer a solutions, you looked at it differently. You looked at it as if you are a competitor within the same organization, right? That is a nuance, I think, which we need to get rid of in terms of, and that's what risk management will help you achieve. So that is the context in terms of the two different comparisons which I've given. Lehman Brothers, where information was not able to trickle from bottom up, and then Goldman Sachs, where the chief executive is able to allow information to flow bottom up, is welcoming to the bad news, because they will want to know what is going wrong, right? And that's the essence of where risk management is. The phrase, what could go wrong? And this is what we'll be looking at more in detail. Let's look at our local perspective. We are now closer to home as a country. If you, as a student, or it could be an organization, you're in an institution working, and you're able to make your strategic objectives for that organization, or you are participating in the strategic objective. Looking at it today, this picture that you're seeing is something that influences decisions today. If you go into these organizations today, this is the picture that will influence decisions. This is not a political lecture. No, this is risk management. If you look at this picture today, it should be able, even you as students, right? You should be able to make a decision having to analyze these, after analyzing these elections. Because today, it's either, and I'm not obviously, and I do apologize for maybe not having pictures of the other party leaders here. I apologize for that in advance. But most important is that the elections that we're going to have in August will change the landscape. Whoever wins, right? Whoever wins these elections, the landscape going forward will change regardless. And this is what is informing strategic decisions now as we speak. And I'll tell you not that most of these organizations that you're seeing, most of them, if not all, have concluded that, especially those that are practicing risk management, they have come to a conclusion that keeping all their eggs in one basket, which has been vigorously shaken as we go forward, will entirely change our landscape going forward. Even you as students, you have to be looking at yourselves and saying to yourself, what if this happens? Do you think this policy might change? Or this policy might change? And that should, even your institution is looking at this, because that will influence their decisions going forward beyond 2021 for the next 5 years. If you're not looking at local perspectives, not if, having looked at your local perspective, you also need to be paying attention to your global and regional perspectives. What is happening in the outside environment? The world at large has been badly hit by COVID-19, a pandemic which has taken many of our colleagues, families, and all. This pandemic has also, going to the definition I gave you in the beginning, has also opened up opportunities for a number of organizations. One good example of a positive that has come out of this pandemic is this platform we're using, Zoom. They've seen the opportunity and they've run with it. A very good example of what risk management does. What are the opportunities? Are you able to interrogate and see opportunities where there's a negative? So you need to be scanning. So we're looking at decision making here. We've looked at the local perspective. You are there. You could be a manager. You could be a supervisor. You could be a chief executive in a few years' time. You will be looking at pictures like this one and saying to yourself, where am I taking my organization today? You have to look at the environment. What is in the environment? Most chief executives today should or have looked at this picture and they've said to it, okay, fine, we have the pandemic, regardless of whichever sector you're in. What are the risks? What are the rewards? What opportunities can we see? You're looking at the agricultural sector. Where is it going? The food basket. And then you bring it closer to home. Where do you see your country in terms of the food basket? Right? Yes, there's also been Brexit. a year ago, even today, the effects of Brexit are still ringing true to most organizations. New leadership in the US, how does that impact your organization, right? From the pandemic, going forward, we'll now have to look at our economic outlook. What are the projections? Where do we see growth? What opportunities do we see there? How do we see China going forward? When we're looking at your supply chains, for instance, depending on where your industries or where your organizations are. The Middle East, there's always a war. Almost every year there's a war. How will that affect your decision in an institution? Say, for instance, if you depend on getting your goods and products from Middle East. So these are some of the decisions which you have to make in an organization. But again, even on an individual basis, because we're looking at the effects of uncertainty, we also make these decisions where you have to now scan your environment and say to yourself, okay, if I have to finish my degree in 2023, for instance, what could go wrong? What are the uncertainties which I could incur on the way? And how will that shape your decisions? There are a number of things you may look at, a lot of them. Is there any uncertainty on the way which could result in closure of the institution? So those are things which you need to be looking at. You have to factor in all those when you make decisions. Even in your homes, you make these decisions on a day-to-day basis. I always, even as I go around the country or the region or the globe, I always give an example of a driver. The role of a driver to any institutions is a critical one. Because before you start off, say for instance, if you're driving into Mongu, Mansa, Chipata, all right, Mongu, or maybe Solwezi, Livingston, wherever you may be driving to, we practice risk management on a day-to-day basis. Drivers do that. We all do. A driver that does not do that are those that you find that they have problems on the way. If you practice risk management, you'll be saying to yourself, do I have a spare tire? Is the car roadworthy? Do I have a jack? Right? Is there enough oil? Is there enough water? What you're doing there is risk management. So why can't you make sure that risk management becomes part of your life, part of your activities, for you to become a good decision maker? Because if you, as a driver, is asking yourself those questions, it means that whatever problem you may encounter on the way, right, you are able to solve it. You are able to face it having known the risks and reward. The reward, obviously, is that you're going to reach that intended destination where you're traveling to. Am I driving at the right stage or the right speed, rather? So that is how risk management will have to shape your decision making. This is an example I was giving. If we are sitting, especially for most chief executives, they're sitting on the top, these chief executives, right? They do, most of them have become so insulated onto themselves and look at it to say, we are okay, we are comfortable, we are okay. But if they don't allow information to flow, this is what may happen to them. They are sitting on an iceberg which will break anytime. It could be your political leaders, it could be your institutional leaders. This is a picture that you have to carry home. Are you practicing risk management? Okay. I think this is from an organization context. An organization will focus more on the bigger risks, right? The risks at the top. So your strategic risk, your reputational risk, your governance risk. And then Having looked at that, you have to look at your people in an institution, your stakeholders, even at your institution, your campus there. You have to look at, do the people appreciate our culture? Is your leadership there allowing you to speak up, having objective discussions? Do they allow the hard talk, right? An institution that thrives or embraces risk management in this aspect, right? It means that they're preparing for the future. Their decision-making will be encompassing everything within that institution. All the stakeholders are welcome to the table. This is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, obviously, for those of you that may know him, is one of the biggest investors, right? One of the richest guys. I think he sits in the top 3, if not 4. He is the chief executive and chairman of an organization, Hathaway. But in essence, he himself, and I quote, he said, "I have to be the chief risk officer, and the truth is, I should be the best person to do it," end quote. Why does he say that? Because chief executives look at all the risks in an organization. So they are, in essence, the main guy. I'll run through the last slides. I don't know how much time we have. But then again, here, it's an example of how important risk management is to an organization, especially when you look at these big organizations in the world. I'll give just 1 or 2 examples. Apple, look at Apple, for instance. The dark blue looks at the book value, right? The lighter blue looks at the brand value of an organization. The purple, what's looking at the reputational premium. This emphasizes how important reputational risk is to an organization. Very important. It places most of its importance on reputational risk. And this is why most times you will find that most of these institutions, if there's any uncertainty, it could be somebody coming out to speak against it, you see that they'll be so fast in issuing a statement to counter that or to correct that. Why? Because their reputation is very important. It could be you as an individual. How is your reputation? All right? We have a reputation of certain leaders, whether it's in the political circles or it could even be in our institutions. How do you view these, or how do you think they view their reputation when they, because decisions that they make, right? People will now look at their reputation. So if they make a decision and somebody has a flawed reputation, it means that people will not appreciate that. Or they'll look, however good the decision they may be making, for as long as their reputation is tainted, they'll look at them differently, right? It emphasizes the importance of reputation. Governance risk is about the big elephant in the room, right? The big elephant is always the chief executive for any institution. In political terms, it could be the president of the country or a political party. Does he or she see himself or herself as a problem? Are people afraid to speak up in those meetings? Does he always come out as he's always right? Right? Does he embrace the uncomfortable discussions to go on so that it could shape a better decision? Right? So that is what governance risk is all about. So we've looked at the strategic risk, we've looked at reputational risk, and now the governance risk. Now, this picture you're seeing is where I think it shows a contrast in terms of where organizations tend to focus when you think of risk, of the risk areas which they face. For those of you that have worked in industry who agree with me that if you look on your right, this is where the most organizations are spending their time. Not that they should not be, but they have misplaced priorities. They want to look at the financial risks. A fraud was committed, right? And they want to be focusing on that. The board should not be focusing on that because those are operational. They're already catered for at the operational level. So this is a survey that was carried out globally. Most organizations or most boards tend to focus on, say, 39% financial reporting risks, right? 42% on the operational risk. A board is getting involved on how the driver is using the vehicle, misplaced priority, right? On the left shows you where most of these boards needs to be focusing on. The strategic, the business, the bigger risks. The risks that we've just been talking to, reputational risk, governance risk, the strategic risks. This is what drives the organization. The chief executives will run all these operational risks, but more importantly, the board should be focusing on the strategic risks and the businesses for that organization. Very important quote this. Even in your individual capacities, this was for a long time the motto on the London Underground, right? So the London Underground came up with this motto: say, if you see anything wrong, say it and we'll sort it. If you see litter within our platforms, say it and we'll get it sorted. Because if you don't say it, right, it will not be sorted. You go out complaining. How valuable this quote is even today, even in our individual capacities. It could be in whatever you're doing, even in an organization. This is more important because if we don't say what is wrong, and this is why organizations need to embrace information flow, because nothing will be sorted if it's not brought to the attention of management or a chief executive or the board. It could even be if you have a problem within Unzabeka, for instance. If no one says it, it will never be sorted, right? Very important quote. Risk management processes, I think I won't spend time on this in terms of risk appetite. But I think I'll try to reemphasize one point, which is this picture that you're seeing in front of you, right? This is very important. This should be the highlight of, and I hope you can pick this up even as you go into your day-to-day activities. Organizations need to take risks. An organization that does not take a risk will never grow, will never develop. Individuals that don't take risks will never grow, will never develop. They will just be stationary. That is what risk appetite is all about. Risk appetite is the amount of risk an organization can take up. I'll give you this example in terms of, I think most of us have eaten fritters, if tumbo, right? The capacity or the risk appetite for you to eat, you could have an appetite of eating 5 fitumbo, right? 5 fitumbo, you have an appetite to eat 5 fitumbo, even buy 5 fitumbo. But at the end of the day, your tummy or your belly can only accommodate 3 fitumbo, because if you eat beyond, you might end up getting sick, right? And this speaks to organizations, because their appetite, they should be able to calculate their appetite and say, this is how much risk we are able to take up. Because we are saying organizations need to take up risks, right? So they should be able to formulate and calculate their appetite. However big their capacity may be. Yes, you might have a big belly, but that big belly, in as much as your appetite is 5 fitumboa, it can only take up 3 Ftombo. That's your cup. So that becomes very important, right? So you have to look at risk appetite in terms of your stakeholders that you speak to. You have your stakeholder, you have government stakeholders if you're an institution, you have your employees as a key stakeholder, you have your board as a key stakeholder, customers stakeholder, and then you have to calculate how much appetite you can come up with your customers or your government, for instance. And this picture, I know it may not be clear, but very important for you to take home, right? Because if you look on your left, on the horizontal axis, or your vertical axis rather, that is where your risk appetite is, and then your exposure is on the horizontal crisis. What you're seeing in the middle there, the blue shade, that signifies how you balance yourself in terms of the risk that you can take up. All right? Excessive risk-taking is bad for your organization. Inadequate risk-taking is also bad for your organization. So it's a thin line which you have to walk, right? And that demonstrates the effective goal of risk management, because you have to walk that fine line. That swinging pendulum, how do you balance it as an organization? Very important that. You forgive me for running through these slides. This basically is the principles of risk management. Risk management needs to be integrated in everything within the organization, all activities. Risk management needs to be embedded in all this. If everyone is practicing risk management within an organization, it means that there will be better decision making. You have to customize it, because my risk where I'm sitting and the risk where you're sitting are different. So make sure that you customize your risks according to your needs as an organization. Risks needs to be dynamic, right? And there has to be a continual improvement in terms of risk. Okay, I think that ends today's presentation. And obviously I'll end with a quote, 2 quotes. One is what you're seeing in front of you, right? Proactive risk management is about anticipating what could happen in the future. If you today are going to come out of this presentation and always in what you do, ask yourself what could go wrong in if you set an objective and then you ask yourself what could go wrong, there are no better decision makers than that person who's asking themselves that question. One of my former bosses I know at the British government where I worked gave me this quote, or asked me a question. Why does a car have brakes, right? And I pondered for days, and the man could not give me answers to that, and I failed to answer it. The reason a car has brakes is for it to go faster, right? A car has brakes for it to go faster. Because if you have brakes, you can drive at whatever speed. The 65 miles per hour, you're able to drive at that speed. Now, imagine a car without brakes. You can't control your speed. And that applies to risk management today. If you're able to embrace risk management in what you do, your decision-making will be flawless, because you'll be looking at what is ahead of you. I thank you. And for now, maybe I can invite some questions. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I've learned so much from you. What impeccable substance that we've received. I've learned that the essence of risk management is to ask yourself this question: what could go wrong? Therefore, you see it, say it, and it will be sorted. So without wasting much of your time, I'll now hand over to Nelly to take us through the interactive segment of this webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. We have a question in the chat for you, Francis. It's from Gerard Hamuyai. He says, you've highlighted the fact that the risk maturity of organizations in Zambia, as reviewed by the survey, what could be the reasons for that, apart from probably the costs associated with having sophisticated risk management systems?
Thank you so much for that question. The reason most organizations have not matured in terms of risk, one, is that most organizations, I think, have been slow to embrace or appreciate the value that risk management offers. And obviously, maybe just to counter your theory there, risk management is not labor intensive. It's not even an expensive practice to set up, because all you need is one person to coordinate the risk functions in an organization from all, because each department will have a departmental head who will be the risk champion, right? And the risk manager or the risk person or that person that you've appointed will only coordinate the risks coming from all these departments, right? But again, coming to that survey, I think the other reason is that there's been, we don't have enough capacity in these institutions, because most organizations, believe you me, even today, want to leave it to the auditor to do risk management. That is a big mistake. There's nothing wrong with an auditor putting in place a risk management function, but an auditor will always look at things from a controls perspective, because the auditor will only have, all they do is to implement controls or put in place controls. Risk management is not about controls. Yes, you can have controls in you doing the risk assessments, but what you're doing there invariably is you're making informed decision making, better decision. It's very strategic. It's a strategic tool which can enhance decision making. It's not about controls, no. And I think this is why we need to build capacity. Even as the Institute of Risk Management Zambia, the more reason we set up was for us to build capacity, to encourage organizations to build capacity so that they appreciate what risk management is all about. And I hope maybe going forward or so, we should be able to achieve that objective so that most of these organizations are able to appreciate this value and see how best it can inform their decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. Gerard, you let us know through the chat if your question has been answered. Another question that was raised even before the webinar, for you as the Institute of Risk Management Zambia, will new information technologies in financial risk management process, what new information technologies in financial risk management processes has the Institute for Risk Management Zambia embraced in the past few years?
Sorry, say that again. What processes have we what?
What new information technologies have you embraced as a company in the past few years?
Okay, I think as an institute, firstly, maybe I'll look at what we've been doing. When government started implementing risk management functions, I was one of the consultants through the institute that has been working with government to train and build capacity for these risk champions. And we helped come up with a few suggestions so that we could do which supported the setup of risk management frameworks in government. So that is one thing that we've been doing. We've also been working with a number of organizations and institutions in implementing and supporting their risk management functions. Obviously, most financial institutions, in terms of setting up the Basel Accord, which we are now, which I think we were so behind, but I think most institutions have approached us to help implement the Basel framework, which is the fourth framework. So more, I think in terms of financial risk, I think those are some of the things we've been doing. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So we noticed on your company website, you carry out research, I'm assuming related to risk management. And a question a final year student would ask, a business final year student or a student from School of Social Sciences and Humanities, what are some of the contemporary areas to do research in risk management as a Zambian student?
Thank you so much. And this is a very important question. Research is the Institute, even if I haven't spoken most about it, the Institute operates under 4 pillars. Remember, this is a non-profit institution. It's a membership-based institution. It operates under 4 pillars. Those 4 pillars are: 1, training to build capacity; 2, the second pillar, and very important, to conduct research; 3, advocacy, as we are doing here, sharing information about risk management and the value that it brings; 4th is about consulting. Talking about the second pillar, which is research, the Institute, and first, maybe even before I focus on that second pillar, what you have to understand and bear in mind is that risk management is not just about people who are economists or financial people. No, risk management is cross-cutting. Engineering, human resource, social science, it cuts across all disciplines. And this is why we are saying enterprise risk management is something that should be embedded in all activities of an organization. Everyone in the value chain needs to practice risk management. Focusing on research, the Institute of Risk Management Zambia, starting this year, will be developing a country risk report together with the Ministry of Finance. We will be inviting a number of institutions, even your institution, your organization as Unzabeka, to come forward to support this, because we want to look at the risks which this country is facing from all disciplines: economic, manufacturing, whether it's environment, all disciplines. We want to be producing an annual report which is looking at all these risks. Most of you will have come across most of these reports which are done by outsiders. It could be the Financial Intelligence, Economic Intelligence Center. They're doing it from outside. We want to make our own country risk report, which will be looking at the risks which this country is facing and how those risks are shaping the development of this country. This is the more reason that starting this year, as we work on the 8th National Development Plan, we are encouraging government to make sure that the 8th National Development Plan has a risk management component to it. Government should be saying, these are the objectives. This is what we intend to achieve in the 5 years that will be in power. These are the risks that we face. How do we mitigate these risks? So risk management needs to be integrated in our 8th National Development Plan. Research will have to be conducted. Final year students are encouraged to get in touch with the Institute. You can come and work with us as an intern and support this because we need your expertise. We want people to be stakeholders in shaping the development of this country. And the country risk report is one vital tool which we'll be using because it will be looking at all the risks vis-a-vis the national development plans which are in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. And as Unzabeka, we actually have a research committee, so we'd like to talk more about that so that we can find means and ways to work with you through our research committee. There's another question in the chat. It's from Ruben. The question says there are instances when organizations are understaffed and have work overloads with common burnouts, and they might think policies set under their organizations do cover some of the risks which they might anticipate. And of course, there is no organization that is infallible. How do you make them see the relevance of having a risk management framework?
Thank you. The more reason these organizations may even be having these banners is because they don't have a risk management framework in place. Risk management is about managing risks. The what could go wrong question, right? The value of that is that it improves decision making. We've looked at instances, the examples that I gave earlier, whether it's global examples, regional examples, or local examples of how risk management can improve decision making. An organization that is able to see the risk areas, it could be a burnout coming as a result of them taking up excessive risks. So in the end, they're playing catch up in their workload. How do they balance it with the rewards that it sees? They could be engaging in activities which do not bring a benefit or a reward to that organization. That in itself could be a risk to that organization. A burnout is a risk to that organization. And this is something that they can use risk management to alleviate those burnouts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. Ruben, you let us know if your question has been answered. As at now, I think you have answered all the questions, Mr. Ziba. Thank you so much. I will hand over back to Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelly. Sorry, perhaps I can just ask one more question in terms of how you work with the government in helping them manage their decisions, especially, for an example, when it comes to an issue of the way they release funds in the name of transfer payments, releasing millions of kwachas at the expense of servicing public debt. So how do you perhaps work with the government to ensure that, okay, this decision will balance with other risky situations like that we have, like inflation?
Sorry, may I just repeat that question? I think I was a bit distracted. Just come through on that.
Okay, my question is, how do you work with the government in helping them make decisions with regards to an event of having risks, like how they have all these expenditures like transfer payments that they release in millions, and they usually pay attention to all these expenses that happen in the country without really considering this servicing public debt. So how do you communicate with them or give them knowledge on how to balance
Okay,
the way
thank
they
you for that.
release their
Thank you for that question. Again, very important question. I'll give an example, and I think this, for those who are economic students, will understand this. Prior to the 7th National Development Plan, the way government used to operate is that it used to run in silos, right? It used to work in silos. A good example would be the Ministry of Education would go to an area like Shangombo, for instance, and build a school there, right? So they would build a school in Shangombo. But then again, that school will be in the middle of nowhere. There'll be no water facilities to that school. There'll be no teachers to that school. The road infrastructure to that school won't be there, right? So it was a siloed way of doing things. Remember, risk management, if you've really integrated risk management or entrenched risk management in everything you do, you're supposed to bring everyone to the table. Government recognized that flaw. Therefore, in the 7th National Development Plan, which I was party to in terms of the drafting, they came up with a sectorial approach to doing things. So instead of the Ministry of Education going to engage the Ministry of Infrastructure, for instance, and go to Shangomo to build that school, they will now bring all stakeholders to the table. And this is the more reason why I always encourage organizations to come up with a communication strategy. Because in that communication strategy, they will identify the stakeholders to that decision. So they'll come up with all the stakeholders. Who's going to do the road? They will invite those people. Who's bringing the water? The Minister of Water. Who's doing this? They'll sit at the table and say, we intend to build a school in Shangobo. How do we bring a road there? How do we bring water there? How do we ensure that there are enough teachers to run that? See what risk management is doing? Improving decision-making. Because what will happen there is that a school will be built with a road to it, with enough teachers to it, on it, with water, clean drinking water. That's how it improves decision-making. Coming to your question, we're now encouraging a fiscal risk budget. We want government to derive value. We want government to see value in its services. Let government focus its resources where there's benefit, value for money. Government should be able to say, this decision will not be good, will not generate value for money if we take more resources to this. If we say, for instance, plowed this money into our debt servicing, for instance, these are the benefits. Government should be able to weigh. Remember that pendulum I showed you? The rewards and the risks. They should be able to ensure that when they look at even that diagram I showed you of the risk appetite and risk exposure, this is the loss that we anticipate out of a decision, and these are the benefits. Government today should be encouraged to be more fiscal, disciplined in how they expend their resources. Put your money where your mouth is. If debt servicing is suffocating all these other developments, government should be able to say, okay, fine. If we say serviced this amount of debt, how much can we now take to improving these services? So with the short answer to your question is risk management will improve decision making on how they'll spend their dollar. They should be able to say, we have $1 today. How much do we take into debt servicing? How much do we put into our services? And what sort of services? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. You've answered my question. And thank you so much, everyone else, for listening. I bet you've gotten 5 or 10 things from what we've learned today. That was a lot. And thank you so much once again, Mr. Francis Zulu, for coming to educate us on managing risks. We appreciate your presence and we look forward to further engagements, interactions, and working with your organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for this opportunity. Please feel free, get in touch whenever you can. You have my contacts and emails. We'll appreciate a collaboration with you. Thank you.
We'll definitely do that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end of our seminar today. Thank you for your time. Unzabeka is what we do. We are the University of Zambia Business and Economics Association. You are more than welcome to join our association. We have a communal group where we orient newcomers on what Unzabeka is all about. And the link has been posted in the chat box. Feel free to join our group so that we tell you the activities and all the committees that come with Unzabeka. Thank you so much for your time. Remember that knowledge is power, and without action, knowledge have a productive day.